Principles and procedures of materials development. Developing principled frameworks for materials development. Creative intuition in materials development. Here, we will be talking about the role of our creative intuition, our imagination, in developing our materials. Writing is fun because it is creative. Writing can be frustrating sometimes when ideas don't come. Just like seasons, ideas come and go, and it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes when they don't come whenever we need them. Writing is absorbing. The best materials are written in trances. Most writers rely heavily on their own intuitions, viewing textbook writing the same way as writing fiction, while at the same time emphasizing constraint of the syllabus. Writing brings joy when inspiration comes, when your hand cannot keep up with the speed of your thoughts. In writing materials, mood engendered by peace, light, etc. is particularly important. Writing instructional materials is best seen as a form of operationalized tacit knowledge, which involves trusting our own intuitions and beliefs. With that being said, according to Mali, if a unit of material does not feel right, no amount of rational persuasion usually changes his mind about it. Richards stated that the process of materials writing is 10% inspiration and 190% perspiration. What is concurrent verbalization? It is developing a framework driven by a practical consideration of what the learners are likely to do rather than any considerations of language acquisition principles. And now, we will be moving on to frameworks for materials development. Now, we have here the lesson format reported by ROSAMAE based on Hutchinson and Waters. And here we have the basic stages of a lesson format outlined by Flores. And here, let's take a look at Jolly's and Bolitho's frameworks or procedures. Principles in materials development. Now, these principles will serve as our guidelines in developing our materials that will be used during our instructions. Most writers on the process of materials development focus on the needs analysis as their starting point. However, there are writers who start by articulating their principles. Here, we can see the principles by which Bell and Gower had used in developing their materials. Now, there are 6 principles of materials design development identified by Noonan. First is materials should be clearly linked to the curriculum they serve. Second, materials should be authentic in terms of text and task. Number 3, materials should stimulate interaction. Fourth, materials should allow the learners to focus on the formal aspects of the language. Fifth, materials should encourage the learners to develop learning skills and skills in learning. And number 6, materials should encourage the learners to apply their developing skills to the world beyond the classroom. Now, these are the theoretical principles and planning and writing by Hall. First is the need to communicate, and then the need for long-term goals, and then the need for authenticity, and then lastly, the need for student-centeredness. Second language acquisition research has informed language teaching materials with particular reference to the design of tasks by Ellis and Tomlinson develops 30 principles of language acquisition and 4 principles of language teaching. Tomlinson argues that second language acquisition is facilitated by a rich and meaningful exposure to the language in use, affective and cognitive engagement, making use of those mental resources typically used in communication in the first language, noticing how the second language is used, being encouraged to interact, and being allowed to focus on the meaning. Now, there are 2 frameworks for materials development, which aim to be principled, flexible, and coherent. These are text-driven and task-driven. Text-driven is ideal for developing course books and supplementary classroom materials, while task-driven is ideal for localizing and personalizing classroom materials and for autonomous learning. Now, let's go to the text-driven approach. As you can see here, these are the stages of a text-driven approach. Number 1, text collection. It involves a willing investment of energy and attention in experiencing the text in such a way as to achieve interaction between the text senses, feelings, views, and intuitions of the reader or listener. This helps the reader or listener to achieve a personal, multidimensional representation in which inner speech, sensory images, and affective stimuli combine to make the text meaningful. Number 2, text selection. This stage involves selecting from one's library of potentially engaging texts, either one text for a particular lesson or a number of texts for a set of materials or a textbook. This stage is considered to be crucial and should therefore be criterion referenced. Criterion reference meaning we have a basis in achieving our effective selection. Now, number 1 is cognitive and affective engagement. We ask the question, does this text engage me cognitively and affectively? Number 2, is the text likely to engage most of the target learners cognitively and effectively? Second is learners' connection to the text. Are the learners likely to be able to connect to the text to their lives? Are the target learners likely to be able to connect the text to their knowledge of the world? Next is multidimensional representation. In here, we ask the question, are most of the target learners likely to be able to achieve multidimensional mental representation of the text? And is the text likely to stimulate divergent personal responses from the target learners? Is the linguistic level of the text likely to present an achievable challenge to the target learners? Is the emotional level of the text suitable for the age and maturity of the target learners? Next is contribution to the personal development of the student. Now, we ask the question, is the text likely to contribute to the personal development of the learner? Does the text contribute to the ultimate exposure of the learners to a range of genres and text types? Moving on to number 3, text experience. This stage involves reading or listening to the selected text again experientially in order to re-engage with the text and reflect on the experience. This re-engagement and reflection is essential in designing activities which can help the target learners to achieve similar engagements. Number 4, reading activities. In this stage, the writer devised activities which could help the learners to experience the text in similar multidimensional ways. Those readiness activities get the learners ready for the reading experience. The activities aim to stimulate mental activity relevant to the content of the text by activating connections, by arousing attention, by generating relevant visual images, and by getting the learner to use inner speech to discuss relevant topics with themselves. Number 5. Experiential activities. These are activities which are designed to help the learners to represent the text in their minds as they read or listen to it, and to do so in multidimensional ways which facilitates personal engagement. These should be mental activities which contribute to the representation of the text and which do not interrupt the process of it nor add difficulty or complexity to the task. These activities should not involve writing answers to the questions nor discussing things in pairs or groups, as this can interrupt the experience and make the representation more difficult. These should be given just before they start to read or listen to the text. Examples: the teacher reads aloud a text and pauses at salient points, while the learners shout out predictions of the next word or phrase. Or, the teacher reads aloud the text while the learners act it out. Or, the teacher reads aloud most of the text and then gets groups of learners to write their own endings. Number 6. Intake response activities. These are activities which help the learners to develop and articulate what they have taken in from the text. They focus on the mental representation which the learners have achieved from their initial reading of the text, and they invite the learners to reflect on this representation rather than return to the text. These activities do not test the learners on their comprehension of the text, but give them a positive start of their post-reading or listening responses, and therefore should not be graded or criticized. Number 7. Development activities. These are activities which provide opportunities for meaningful language production based on the learner's representations of the text. They involve the learners going back to the text before going forward to produce something new. Learners can base their language production both on what they have already understood from the text and on the connections with their own lives. Lastly, number 8, input-response activities. These are activities which take the learners back to the text and which involve them in studial reading or listening tasks aimed to helping them make discoveries about the purposes and the language of the text. They could be categorized as interpretation tasks and awareness tasks. Interpretation tasks are input-response tasks which involve learners thinking more deeply about the text in order to make discoveries about the author's intentions in creating it. They are aimed at helping the learners develop critical and creative thinking skills in the target language. Examples: deep questions, debates about the issues in the text, critical reviews of the text for a journal, interviews with the characters, and interviews with the authors. While awareness tasks are input activities which provide opportunities for the learners to gain awareness from a focused study of the text, thus gradually developing apprehension. These involve investigation of a particular feature of a text plus research involving checking the typicality of the investigated feature by analyzing the same feature in the use in other equivalent texts. This approach is best used flexibly. Some stages must precede others, but there's no need to follow all the stages in the framework. The sequence of some stages may also vary. The teacher may also focus on a particular type of activity depending on the needs of the learners. Moving on to task-driven approach to materials development. In this approach, the learners are given tasks to complete in which their focus is on the meaning rather than the form, in which their goal is successful task completion rather than explicit learning of the language. The theory is that they will acquire language, language strategies, learning strategies, and communication skills from their experience of performing the tasks. The main characteristics of a task-based approaches are that a task specifies a non-linguistic outcome, sets an achievable challenge, requires language use in order to achieve the specified outcome, replicated real-life use of language, has both a learner goal and a teacher target. Now here is a sample principled framework. Number 1 is readiness activity. Number 2 is task-related experience. Number 3 is personal response to the experience. Number 4 is task specification. Number 5 is the first task performance. Number 6 is the discovery of language features. And number 7 is the second task performance. There are two types of principled task-driven approach. The first type is problem-solving approach. This involves setting a problem for the learners and their task goal is to solve it. The second type is content language integrated learning or CLIL. This involves teaching the learners a subject, a topic, or skill through a medium of a language they are learning. Overall, the activities in a course should match with the learner needs and wants with the principles of language learning, and that they should be developed in ways in which provide flexibility of use to learners and teachers, as well as the coherence of connection. The instructional design of a course book is as it is because of what it has to do. An application of a systematic functional theory. What is systematic functional theory? Later on, I will be telling you about the concepts that I have gathered from systematic functional theory. The said theory help us understand the systems and networks of choices engaged in the process of knowledge construction through the instructional design of a course book, serving as a framework for understanding the instructional design and ideological underpinnings of course books and explicating the position of language learning and the course book itself. Knowledge thus constructed and presented is not innocent but motivated. The instructional design of a course book is not monologic discourse, but a chorus of multiple voices of its stakeholders, the publisher and the writer at the very least. The main appeal of this theory for course book analysis is that it looks at the text as a social cultural product developed to achieve three main functions, the meta functions. The analysis then helps uncover the meaning that actually emanates from the text, this being the result of the complex conscious and unconscious interactions of multiple stakeholders. When the result is compared with the original intent of creating the materials, we will have some pointers of effectiveness of materials on the materials development process itself and on the course book itself as a social, cultural, political artifact. Thus, the said theory can contribute to the development of a theoretical model and an analytical approach to evaluation of the instructional design of a course book, which is both functional and meaning-based. Different stakeholders may have different motivations, which may be in conflict and could lead to the dominance of a perspective over the others and will be evident in the materials. With that being said, according to Halliday, language is as it is because of what it has to do. The course book instructional design can be considered a communicative act by itself, but it is also a dynamic artifact that contributes to and create meaning together with the other participants in the context of language teaching. It cannot exist of and by itself. It fulfills a need, a purpose, and it performs a function and conveys meaning. The particular form taken by the grammatical system of language is closely related to the social and personal needs that language is required to serve. A course book also has to teach. It has a set of teaching objectives as listed in the syllabus document. It is located in the culture and situation from which it emerges and is a manifestation of it. The three contexts of use within which language operates, that of situation, culture, and ideology, identified in the functional linguistics, can be applied to the instructional design of a course book too. The instructional design forms a response to a complex social need that is constructed by the pedagogical situation in which it is produced. Register theory. It describes the impact of the dimensions of the immediate context of the situation of a language event, the way language is used. Next, we have the dimensions in register theory. The first is register variables of mode, which means the amount of feedback and role of language or course book. Second is tenor, the role relations of power and solidarity between speaker or listener and between course book and teacher or learner. Third is the field, which is the topic or focus of the activity. Genre, as defined by Pear and Smart, is a distinctive profile of regularities across four dimensions: a set of text, the composing processes involved in creating these texts, the reading practices used to interpret them, and the social roles performed by the readers and the writers. The role of a course book reflects or must reflect decisions concerning its primary goal and form, the relation the course book holds to the other sources of input, and the abilities of the teacher. When planning and developing course book materials, we should first consider these following questions. First is, how is the instructional design of the course book structured for use? Second, what dimension of context are reflected in the course book design and structure? How and why? Third, what view of the world of English, of learning English, of the teacher and the learner is presented explicitly and implicitly through the instructional design of a course book? Here, we can see a table presented to us by Singapore Rhouela, the application of Eggins to course book analysis. Just as in language, the three levels of operation presented in Figure 5.1 relate to each other systematically, and yet within each level too, they operate on a structured system governed by rules based on their function. Moving on to the context of culture, the genre of the course book. Genres comprise stages or steps which are recognized as conventional. These form schematic structure of the genre. Now here is the typical schematic structure. The title, the introduction, the learning task or the series of learning tasks, and the closing. As a semiotic system, both language and the instructional design of the coursebook contain resources for fulfilling three kinds of broad communicative functions, or for making three kinds of meaning simultaneously: ideational, interpersonal, and textual. Ideational meta function. It is based on the informative properties inherent in language by representing the values and knowledge shared by the communicators. This is the realization of the field of discourse circumscribing what the speakers are engaged in doing. Interpersonal meta function. It comprises use of language representative of social and personal relations and is concerned with the tenor of discourse as determined by the roles assumed by or assigned to the interlocutors. Interpersonal relations and meanings are assumed in a course book through asking the following questions. How do the creators of the course book position the teacher and the learner? Who do they address? And how do they address them? Textual meta function. It ensures the effectiveness of a communicative act by providing a texture incorporating the remaining strands of potential into the fabric of linguistic structure. In relation to the instructional design of a course book, we can ask how the ideational and interpersonal aspects of meaning come together to form a coherent whole in the materials. The purpose of a course book is to teach something new or to facilitate the learner's learning of something new. Moving on to the plane of expression. In the content of plain expression, all the course books are based on the same syllabus and therefore at the first level of operation have more or less similar outcomes. However, as we move downwards in the model proposed by Singapore Rhouela in Figure 5.1 towards the second level of operation, that is, the scope and sequence of the individual course books, differences begin to be apparent. To be able to look at the course book unit as the final and actual articulation of meaning, we ask the following questions. How is content expressed in the course book unit? What does the course book unit mean? What kinds of meanings are created simultaneously and independently? In conclusion, systematic functional theory offers useful tools for examining the kinds of meaning that a course book embeds in its discourse. It offers a different vantage point from which to explore in the materials development exercise. A course book is as it is because of what it has to do.
Good day, everyone. I am ROSAMAE CASALJAY, and I'm about to discuss the topic of dehumanizing the course book. What is a course book? A course book is a book used by students when they do a particular course of study. Humanizing the course book means making it appeal to students' personality, encourage their activity and creativity, and provide conditions for their personal development. It was experienced by Tomlinson that there were a class of women who failed to learn English formally and had no confidence at all in their ability to use English for communication. In developing materials for language teaching, it is very essential to humanize a course book. This way, the teacher can replace sections of it with more humanistic materials and involve the learners in gaining and reflecting on experience. According to Tomlinson, there was a partial replacement of the course book. It was happened in Jakarta, Indonesia, wherein there was a teacher who asked her class if they liked their course book. So what happened there, it seemed that the course book was found to be very boring and the students disliked the dull reading text because they seemed to have no connection with their lives. And so, the course book lessons were replaced with one of the teacher's own, meaning to say, the teacher shifted to another set of activities made by herself. It has clear benefits. Why? Because the teacher is often more interested in their own content than the student's course book, and it might be more suitable. Then what happened to the class when a teacher and students are working with the same language or interest? So it was believed that after the semester, the students gained confidence and enjoyment connected to their lives. It was believed that the students are the best collaborators in a performance-based learning environment wherein the students find and devise exercises and games themselves, research situations, and texts. We have here other examples of partial replacements that we can utilize in the classroom to have an engaging and meaningful learning process. The first one is helping a multilingual class of intermediate level learners to video their versions of poems, short stories, and extracts from novels. The second is encouraging teachers to get students to develop their own class libraries by staggering into class with a huge cardboard box and inviting the students to look at their new class library. The third is getting learners to act out scenarios in which a student represented her group by interacting with a student from another group to resolve a conflict. The fourth is encouraging teachers to give each student in their class a blank cassette and prompt them to record something interesting in English. The last is starting classes with task-free activities. Moreover, we have here ideas for a partial replacement of the textbook. The first one is using a process drama approach. When we say process drama approach, it is where the students and the teacher together developed simultaneous improvisations of a scene from a situation. The second is using problem-solving activities. It is where the groups of learners in a scenario in which they combine their experience, their intelligence, and their language ability to solve a problem together. The third is using clowning activities. When we say clowning activities, it is where the learners perform bizarre improvisations from instructions given by a clown instructor. And the last is we have using a clay animation series. When we say clay animation series, it is where featuring talking animals as the basis for the discovery of features of spoken English. The activities mentioned above have the common objective of adding relevance and engagement to the learner's classroom experience, as well as treating the learners as intelligent human beings. Students are also considered, seen, heard, and validated, not only as followers of a course book. That is why, in developing materials for language teaching, it should be student-centered. When we say student-centered approach, it is where learners' knowledge and experiences are validated. The content of instruction is relevant to the learner's needs and interests. Learners make choices about content and classroom activities, and also classroom interactions and tasks represent how language is used in the real world. Learners' first language and culture are viewed as a resource of learning, and also classroom tasks challenge learners and promote higher order thinking skills. The last one is when we say student-centered approach or learner-centered instruction, it is where learners acquire strategies for learning inside and outside of the classroom. Next, we have humanizing with the course book. When we say humanizing, it is to improve and enlighten the materials to be used in the classroom. To humanize is to make things more humane and easier for humans to relate to and appreciate too. In addition to that, language teaching materials need to be humanizing, taking into account learners' experience of life, their interests and enthusiasms, their views, attitudes and feelings, and above all, their capacity to make meaningful connections in their minds. We have here the 5 examples of such an approach. The first one is getting the whole class to act out. The second is giving the students a text and asking them in groups. The third is organizing a competition. The fourth is stimulating the groups. And five is giving the students some of the coursebook activities. So these examples are actually essential, especially when we are going to develop material for language teaching. In developing materials for language teaching, the English for Academic Purposes says that the affective aspect of learning needs to be taken into account in the design of activities and materials. Suggestions for teachers should be included with regards to motivating students and maximizing their cognitive and effective engagement in the materials. When developing humanistic course books, there are a number of ways. The first one is writing in large and varied themes. The second is using a text-driven approach. The third is using a multidimensional approach. The fourth is using literature. The fifth, we're going to talk to the learners. The five, connecting to the learners' views and opinions. The last is we're going to localize the course books. So those are ways on how to develop a humanistic and meaningful course books. The first one is writing in large and varied themes. In writing a course book, the writer starts out energized with enthusiasm and ideas. For the material to be more effective and meaningful, it should consist of new and experienced teachers, material writers, a poet, an artist, an applied linguist, a musician, a chief examiner, and a cartoonist, so that there will be brainstorming of ideas wherein the content of the material will be meaningful and effective. In writing a course book, the team must demonstrate humanistic approaches and activities to stimulate thought and ideas and design material that is engaging to the learners. So the goal in writing in large and varied teams is teamwork and collaboration. So after the writing in large and varied teams, the second way is using a multidimensional approach. So this approach is involving the cognitive, emotional, and social perspectives of the students. This approach also aims to help learners develop the ability to produce and process the second language by using their mental resources in ways similar to those they use when communicating in their first language. So this approach is based on the principle that using effect, mental imagery, and inner speech is what we do during effective language use. There are procedures to apply the multidimensional approach. The first one is activities that include impact. Activities which engage affect, so for example, emotional involvement, the positivity towards the learning experience, and the self-esteem of the learners. So by involving learners in recalling and recounting personal experiences, it makes the development of the material in teaching the language more effective and significant. In developing material effectively, the second procedure is imaging activities encourage learners to create mental images while processing or producing language. So it means that while processing or producing words, students are encouraged to conjure up images in their minds through imaging exercises. By doing so, learners will be much more excited to know and learn the next topic. The third procedure is inner voice activities that encourage learners to talk to themselves in the second language while processing and producing language in the second language as well. So that is the third procedure in applying the multidimensional approach. The fourth is kinesthetic activities, which involve learners in momentary mental activity before following instructions in the second language in order to perform physical activities. So those kinesthetic activities, such as playing games, making models, and cooking meals, are considered kinesthetic activities. And the last procedure we have process activities help learners create a version of a text themselves before reading or listening to the complete text. So those five mentioned examples or the procedures are very appropriate and applicable in the multidimensional approach. Next is we have using a text-driven approach. In text-driven approach, the materials development for language learning are those in which units of materials are driven by potentially engaging written spoken or visual text rather than by pre-selected teaching points. Actually, there is an article and according to an article, a text-driven approach explores how texts work. So the purpose of a text-driven approach is to enable learners to become competent, confident, and critical readers, viewers, and writers of text. And also, it involves listening, reading, viewing, and analyzing text to understand how they are produced and what their effects are. So, in developing a course book, the writers must select potentially engaging text from the books, magazines, newspapers, and cassettes that made available to them. In text-driven approach, additionally, the developers must devise pre-reading or listening activities to help activate the learners' minds in readiness for connecting the text to their own lives. The second is the developers must develop post-reading activities that aimed at helping the learners articulate and develop their mental representations of the text. The third is this kind of approach is effective in ensuring that the course book is humanistic, and that is true because this kind of approach is very effective because it enables the learners to become more competent, confident, and critical readers. Another thing is using literature. So in using literature, it is a means of stimulating multidimensional mental activity during language learning. And the learners are helped and encouraged to experience the literature rather than study it, and to build up a library of texts that are linguistically simple but cognitively and emotionally complex. So in using literature, it is not merely on reading the whole text, but also to practice and develop the comprehension skills of the learners. One way of developing a material is talking to the learners. The voice of most course books is semi-formal and distant, and it matches the stereotype of the knowledge transmitting teacher talking at his learners. It is very important to have a conversation with the learners so that the developers can evaluate the learners' needs, preferences, interests, and opinions. There are features of orality. The first one is informal discourse. The second is the active rather than the passive voice. The third is concreteness. The fourth is inclusiveness. And the fifth one is sharing personal experiences and opinions. So these features of orality are essentials when how to start a conversation with the learners. The next is connecting to the learner's views and opinions. It is where allowing students opportunities to express these opinions is especially beneficial when applying our content standards to real world scenarios. And also, connecting to the learner's views and opinions is helping students deepen their understanding of what they read and to connect with them. The last is localizing course books. So one way of connecting a course book to the real world which the learner lives in is to localize course books. So learning a language in such a world can reduce the learner from an individual human being with views, attitudes, and emotions to a language learner whose brain is focused on low-level linguistic decoding. That is why it is very important to localize a course book so that the learners will understand the discussion thoroughly and can relate to it since it is contextualized. Additionally, humanistic approaches to language learning can facilitate both language acquisition and personal development. Unfortunately, most language learners learn from course books, and some course books are not humanistic. However, it is not difficult to make a course book more humanistic, and it is possible to develop course books which are both humanistic and profitable. So what can a good course book give the teacher? So according to Longman, a good course book can help a teacher by providing, first one, a clearly thought out program which is appropriately sequenced and structured to include progressive revision. The second one is a wider range of materials that an individual teacher may be able to collect. And the third one is security. So course books function as a reference in the learning process. They make sure that the subjects taught in various states and schools are comparable. And also, good course book, it imparts values, attitudes, abilities, and knowledge to both teachers and the students. And also, a good course book can help a teacher by providing economy of preparation time, a source of practical ideas, a work that the learners can do on their own so that the teacher does not need to be the center stage all the time, and also a basis for homework if this is required, and a basis for discussion and comparison with other teachers. So in addition to the aforementioned advantages, course books give programs structure and a syllabus. It is also aid in maintaining quality, standardized instruction, and also offer a variety of learning resources that are efficient because they free up teachers' mind and can offer useful language models and input essential in the learning process. Moreover, students want a course book to be colorful and interesting. They hope the course book will contain exciting games and activities, and also the students hope that the materials to be used will contain exciting stories, amusing dialogues, and entertaining songs and shows. But the question is, what do the children need? We all know that children have short memories. They find it difficult to retain ideas and language from one lesson to the next. So the children need a course book which becomes an accessible and understandable record of their work. And so, when there is a good course book, it gives the students a sense of progress, progression, and purpose. Next is, it is a sense of security. And when there is a good course book, it gives the student scope for independent and autonomous learning. And lastly, it is a reference for checking and revising. And And now we have the visual elements in English as foreign language course books or in EFL course books. So what is the importance of elements in EFL course books? So when we say visual images or elements, it actually helps students make sense of output and input. And now we have the visuals in recent British course books that were examined by David. So these three students' books were at the intermediate level. So what do we get? What are the rules of these course books? The first one we have the inside out. The second is we have the intermediate. And so the visual elements in the three course books was black and white pictures were dominated by colored pictures and drawings are less common than pictures. Now we have here the table to show the balance of illustrations, drawings, and photos in 3 intermediate course books. So the first row, inside out, face-to-face, outcomes, those are the intermediate course books. The second row, pages of text, so based from the table, we can conclude that Inside Out course book has a higher number of drawn illustrations. So as you can see in the table, for the total drawings, Inside Out has 73, and for the total photos, it has 122. It was also analyzed how many of the pictures were specifically used in the text of the student's book and how many were for decoration. Based on the given data, we can conclude that more pictures show straight portraits and people doing something or in addition, the vast majority of portraits are photographs. So there are 111 against only 5 drawings, and a relatively high number of the interaction pictures are drawings, 38 out of 106. So this means Next, we have pictures for use versus decoration in the 3 course books. So the first one is photos for decoration. Inside Out has 83, Face to Face has 43, and Outcomes has 90. While for use, Inside Out has 39. The key points here are some publishers, editors, and writers believe that having visually appealing, engaging drawings in their course books is more crucial than including images with activities that go along with them. And also, the material writers give editors and designers. Given that 46.6% of the illustrations in the 3 course books, almost half of the pictures in the EFL course books have activities attached to them. In what situations are visual elements used? Number one is activities dealing with precise elements of the unit language focus, such as syntax or vocabulary. So finding objects from a written list in the picture. Second is matching written. And so the given example here is matching written text with pictures. The second is activities working on listening comprehension. There are many activities for listening comprehension that we can utilize in the classroom. So the first one is recognizing and labeling people or objects on the basis of listening passage. The second is, in addition, visual elements are important in listening comprehension because they help learners comprehend the key points of audio material. And also, some learners learn quickly and easily when they are stimulated and involved. The third activity is finding or giving information. So for examples, illustrations which clearly details in reading a text, and the second is looking for information in the picture. So for the in the given example, the students will be asked, what can you say to the teenagers in the picture? Technically, the students can answer it based on what they see in the picture. With that, they can now share an information. So that is looking for information. For number 4, deduction and creativity. For example, making judgments or inventing information about people or situation in the picture. And so, materials in course books are used for fairly low-level language practice with few activities aimed at stimulating students to use the language at their disposal, creatively starting from the pictures. If the students will be given an activity, for example, they will be given pictures of different types of country roads. The students will be asked to imagine that they are standing in the road and to note the responses. It could be something they can see outside the picture, some In conclusion, it has shown that a majority of pictures included are used only for decorative purposes, and that those used for language purposes tend to concentrate on low-level language skills related to basic language manipulation. However, from the three course books that were examined, having 50% of the pictures in a given course book used for purely decorative purpose. Actually, it is a great waste of effort on the part of the publisher and a great waste opportunity for the language learner. There is a question, what might we do with visuals in course books? So visuals in course books, when starting off, we are going to think about substituting visual aids like charts, graphs, diagrams, and photographs for what might we do with visuals in course books? Photography and language course books can prompt students to engage in class discussion, and it has always been used as an effective resource. They claim that the photograph is a message without a code. What does it mean? A message without a code. The topic matter, the intended audience, and the learning objectives all influence the choice of images. It's crucial to provide images that complement the text and improve comprehension without overpowering or diverting the reader. And so, visual learning also helps students to develop visual thinking, which is a learning style whereby the learner comes better to understand and retain information better by associating ideas, words, and concepts with images. Visual information is presented. That ends the visual elements in the course books. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is LIEZEL, and today I am tasked to discuss creative approaches to writing materials by Alan Malley. What is creativity? Part 1 of this chapter is the discussion of creativity. Creativity, by definition, is the ability to make new things or think of new ideas. Creativity is the impulse to break out of conventional ways of thinking and discover truth about the world. There are key components of creativity. One is newness, second is immediacy, third, respect, experiment, divine creativity, seeing relationships, and unpredictable randomness. What is newness as a key component of creativity? Newness, by definition, means original, innovative, novelty, unusual, or surprising. To be qualified as creative, we have to recognize that something new has been brought into being. Yet all creative ideas owe a debt to what has gone before. It is their ability to use the past to frame the present in a new light which characterizes creativity. Now, what is immediacy as a component of creativity? Immediacy, by definition, means sudden, flash, illumination, and spontaneous. So, what is immediacy? What is intuition? Creativity involves your imagination and your ability to make or do something original. Immediacy is the sense or quality of being directly involved. This aspect is best characterized by the eureka supposedly uttered by Archimedes as he leapt from his bathtub. Many creative geniuses report that their insights came to them in a flash of sudden clarity. Moving on to the third component of creativity, which is respect. By definition, this means awe, wonder, admiration, and delight. The word respect comes from the Latin word respectus, meaning attention, regard, or consideration. It can be defined as esteem for a sense of the worth or excellence of a person, a personal quality or ability, or something considered manifestation of a personal quality or ability. The truly creative act gives rise to feelings of pleasurable recognition on the part of others. Next is experiment, means exploration, curiosity, preparedness, tacit knowledge, puzzle, problem solving, play, and heuristics. Most kind of playing around with things, with asking the question, what if, and the ability to think the unthinkable. But curiosity alone is never enough. Being prepared is the sense of being well informed about an area is an essential prerequisite to this component of creativity. Next is the divine creativity. Define, by definition, means intuition, insight, imagination, inspiration, illumination, divine spark, gift, or hunch. Divine creativity is a concept that refers to the idea that our Heavenly Father and His beloved Son are deeply creative beings and that we are made in their image and likeness and are also deeply creative beings. Creative inspiration is a divine, ever flowing, overflowing stream, and each of us is a powerful creator with God. The true nature of creativity is defined as the flow of divine creative energies, which begins with the download of these energies as divine inspiration. Another component of creativity is seeing relationships or connections, associations, combinations, analogies, metaphors, or seeing in a new way peripheral attention or incubation. So, this is an important component of creativity to make connections, often between apparently unrelated data. According to Louisler, he called this a by association, and the Surrealists used it as a principle for generating new artistic creations. However, in order to see new relationships, it may be necessary to suspend conscious attention so that material which is on the periphery of our attention may gain access to the unconscious layers of mind. Creativity is the ability to see relationships where none exist. Another component of creativity is the acceptability or recognition, relevance, significance, or value. However innovative a creation may be, it is unlikely to be taken up unless it is recognized as relevant to the field in which it occurs. Creative ideas must therefore be historically relevant as well as merely novel. Tomlinson makes use of these principles to develop criteria for the development and evaluation of materials, and then makes use of these criteria to evaluate six currently used global coursebooks. Why do we need creativity? First, we need creativity because it is psychologically inevitable, given the nature of human mind, which as a complex system is predisposed to generate new ideas. What distinguishes humankind from other is almost genetically identical species is precisely the ability to make creative adaptations and discoveries, and to pass them on succeeding generations. Another, we need creativity because it is necessary for survival. The context in which language teaching and learning takes place is constantly evolving under the pressure of other forces, such as changing minds, changing technology, changing economic needs, etc. And we are obliged to respond to this by changing ourselves at an ever accelerating rate, according to Blake and Robinson. Also, because it is inevitable historically, as Kuhn has shown, any given domain tends to follow a cyclical pattern of development. After a period of dominance by one paradigm, accepted by all, with knowledge and procedures routinized, there comes a period of questioning, the discovery of insights and ideas which then supplant the paradigm. We need creativity because creativity stimulates and motivates. Teachers who actively explore active solutions tend to be more alive and vibrant than those content to follow a routine. Students, given the opportunity to exercise their own creativity, tend to respond positively. Also, the materials writer who approaches the job too creatively is likely to produce more interesting materials, according to Puglis. Also, language use and learning are inherently creative processes. People indulge in vast amounts of creative language play through punning, riddles, and jokes. Now, how has creativity been applied? Before moving to the second part of this chapter, it will be worth reviewing some examples of creative ideas from the recent past. Now let's talk about heuristics. What are heuristics? Heuristics are mental shortcuts that allows us to make decisions quickly without having all the relevant information. They are simple, efficient rules either learned or inculcated by evolutionary processes. Heuristics also help us to deal with complex problems or incomplete information, but they may also lead to errors or biases. In this book, Breaking Rules by John Fanslow, he recommends applying the heuristic or the do the opposite as a way of generating new possibilities in language teaching, and this includes the following injunction: content, process, and roles. So how do we apply the do the opposite heuristics when it comes to the content? For instance, if you habitually use written texts, you may try using listening instead, or if you use longer texts, you may try the shorter ones. If you use simplified texts, use authentic ones, or you may try doing without texts altogether. When it comes to process, if you use a lot of group and pair work, you may try some individual and whole class work. Or if you normally expect immediate answers to your questions, you may try asking students to delay the replies. Now, when it comes to roles, how do you apply the do the opposite heuristics? For instance, if you do all the teaching, you may let the students do some of it. Or if you set tests, you may let students write their own tests. Now let's come to the designer methods. So what are the designer methods? The so-called designer methodologies, which came to prominence in the 1970s and 1980s by Stavik, are all interesting applications of the do the opposite heuristic. First, we have the silent way by Gategno. This designer method reverses the idea that the teacher does all the talking and that it is the teacher's duty to instruct. Instead, learners thrown back on their own resources to painfully construct their own inner criteria from minimal clues. Another method is the community language learning or CLL by Quran. It is the learners who develop their own dialogic text and take their own preferred learning pathways into the new language as they proceed from an infantile to a mature state in that language. The teacher is essentially a sympathetic informant. Another designer method is the principles of suggestopedia by Safires. These methods go directly counter to receive wisdom in foreign language pedagogy, where learners are required to make no conscious effort to learn. Rather, they are exposed to texts of unprecedented length. The relaxed atmosphere created through Baroque music, comfortable chairs, and low lighting is decidedly unlike a normal classroom. Now, the TPR by Asher, or the total physical response. This method confines the early stages of learning to listening alone, where the teacher speaks, but this requires only nonverbal responses as confirmation of comprehension. Now, what are these nonverbal responses? So, we're talking about gestures or other body languages. N.S. Prabhu. Who is Prabhu? Prabhu ranks as one of the most original and iconoclastic 20th century thinkers on language teaching. Two of his contributions were the development of procedural, task-based syllabus and of a radically different approach to materials writing. Moving on to part 2 of this chapter, which is the ideas for generating creative materials. Now, having reviewed ways in which creativity theory may illuminate thinking about materials writing, and having given some practical examples of creativity in language pedagogy from the recent past, it is time to look towards possible future development. Ideas for generating creative materials. In this part, I will introduce the chart for organizing language teaching materials. Teachers and users are also stakeholders. Teachers influence the selection of course books to be used, while a central reviewing body, often the Ministry of Education, approves the development of course books when done as a response to a national directive. Here are the parts of a chart for organizing language teaching materials. inputs, process, and outcomes. The inputs comprise all the raw material the writer might wish to consider for inclusion, while in the process, these are what is done with an input. Finally, the outcomes. The outcomes are the objectives the writer hopes to achieve all through the inputs and processes. So you can see, I have here the chart for organizing language teaching materials. It is divided in three columns. In the first column are the inputs, while in the second column are the processes, and in the third column are the outcomes. In thinking about creative uses of the chart, it may be useful to draw upon some of what we have learned from the creativity theory, and this would include the following. First is playing around. Both materials, writers, and in fostering the playful element in learners. Leaving room for chaos to operate by throwing up new unexpected regularities in the complex system we are working in, testing the constraints of our conceptual spaces, trying out new ways of adapting old practices, and using heuristics and analogy to stimulate thinking. Another is allowing time and silence for ideas to incubate, both for material writers and for the users of the materials. Another is making unusual juxtapositions using the random combination principle. Drawing on other domains outside language pedagogy. Remembering that novelty is not enough and that the system we operate in has to be ready to perceive relevance of our ideas. Here are some applications. In the inputs, you may include the following. People. People, we are in danger of overlooking the resource nearest to us, namely the human resource in our own class. In choosing themes or topics, we can also go well beyond the conventional and familiar. Text still form the basis of most published materials. It is now possible to exploit the creative possibilities of the new range of reference materials available. One creative way of approaching realia, visuals, and audio input is to pass responsibility for providing innovation to the learners instead. A highly useful resource teachers is Russell Stannard's www.teachertrainingvideos.com, which puts the new technologies within the reach of teachers. We will now move on to the processes. Process can also enhance the creative quality of the materials. Here are brief suggestions from each of the 5 categories in the chart. Generic. The use of time can be handled creatively, for instance, by setting the tight time constraints on some activities. Another example is by giving dictations at normal speed rather than slowly with pauses. Management. In management, one creative way to manage routines, and instructions is to replace verbal with non-verbal cues. The list of techniques given is far from exhaustive, but any technique can be applied creatively. Stravik drew attention to the power of visualization, and Tomlinson has developed techniques to promote visualization and inner specs in the processing of texts. The set of task types is likewise incomplete, but all those listed can be creatively applied. For example, if the task involves evaluating something, for instance, a text, a film, a piece of writing, students can devise their own criteria. Finally, the outcomes. Inputs and processes interact to produce outcomes, but in complex ways not reducible to a formula. I believe, however, that we can greatly extend the range and relevance of outcomes by thinking creatively about them. Traditionally, we have been mainly concerned with material and pedagogical outcomes, the direct product of learning. For instance, student-generated texts can be much more varied. The availability of word processing makes possible a greater value and higher quality of products. Access to video and sound recognition facilities can likewise add to range of material outcomes. To conclude, there are two main factors in any consideration of creative materials, and these are: first, the immoderate growth in power of the testing industry, both public and private, and the tightening stranglehold of systems like the Common European Framework or the CAF of Morrow. Secondly, the current obsession with smart technology, which offers a mesmerizing range of gadgets and tools which tend to confuse novelty with creativity. We need to remind ourselves constantly that technology should be a tool in the service of creativity and not a substitute for it. Developing digital language learning materials. We are now in the chapter 9, and this focuses on the use of digital technology in language teaching. This has an extensive and increasingly diverse history, often divided by commentators into three phases or approaches. These are restricted, open, and integrated. Cultural competencies and skills. Play. Play is the capacity to experiment with one's surroundings as a form of problem solving. Performance is the ability to adopt alternative identities for the purpose of improvisation and discovery. Simulation, the ability to interpret and construct dynamic models of real-world processes. Appropriation is the ability to meaningfully sample and matrix media content. Multitasking is the ability to scan one's environment and shift focus as needed to salient details. Collective intelligence. It is the ability to pool knowledge and compare notes with others toward a common goal. Here are key reasons why teachers don't adopt technology. First is the extent of the curriculum that needs to be covered during the year. Second is the time constraints. Time required for preparing ICT-based activities, availability of infrastructure, amount of quality content, lack of in-classroom teacher support, lack of participation of teachers in decision making, and the need for professional development. This chapter will primarily focus on those tools or materials which can be said to truly exploit a digital mode or media in their design or delivery. For example, is of language corpora, although dependent on computer technology for its creation and use, has an equal impact on print materials and will not be of particular fate for you. Some examples of things which embrace and exploit the digital delivery mode are materials which are based on the idea of an infinite canvas. For example, the Prezi presentation tool from www.prezi.com. Another is the materials which capitalize on the scrolling page. Example is the ELT Comic Grammarman's Whole at www.grammarman.com/whole. Another example is the tools with which introduce new forms working with text, for example, the swipe keyboard for touchscreen devices and many more. Three key principles in relation to effective use of interactive whiteboards by Weiner et al. Multimodality, the facility afforded by the new media for the easy production and use of multiplicity of modes of representation, sound, image, writing, moving image, in speech. Another principle is the orchestration. The role of the teacher in encouraging pupil participation involves the teacher's shaping or orchestration of the numerous modes and resources to support learning of planned objectives. Another major area of interest for teachers in creation of digital materials for language learning is the rise of the interactive whiteboard in classrooms. Its effective integration in the language classroom is a long-term project for any teacher or institution, which is said to progress through three stages. First stage is the infusion, the spread of the use of the technology into existing pedagogical practice with learners as passive observers of the tool. Integration, the technology embedded in the curriculum and attention paid to how it can enhance learning goals. Learners are more active participants. Transformation, the technology adds value to the learning process. Learners are centrally involved in an inquiry-based construction of knowledge. The more adventurous side, which guide the teacher through creation of apps for smartphone and tablet use, is the http://snappy.com. Finally, on the theme of digital video, there are the possibilities for creation of screencasts or videos with audio commentary of what is happening on the creator's screen. This is offered by products such as Jing at www.techsmith.com/jing.html. These offers a radical redefinition of the concept of teacher-student feedback on written text presentations. Against the backdrop of all these digital developments are twin concerns. First, that technological innovation can often outpace pedagogical consolidation. That is, the principled implementation of the technology to support existing pedagogical practice or the development of new pedagogies to take advantage of technological advances.
Now we have the demystifying blended learning. Let us first define what is blended learning. Define first what is blended learning. When we say blended learning, it refers to the combination of face-to-face and technology-based learning. In the illustration, it shows there the classroom learning and the online learning were being blended. If we are going to look at the literal meaning of blending, it means the action of mixing or combining things together. This characterized the integration of technology that was already used in the educational context. Blended learning research has indicated that students who participate in blended learning are able to grasp the course information more thoroughly. Students can expand on what they have learned in class by using internet research resources. With the vast array of information available on the internet, individuals can explore the subject further in their own. Key points here are first, the approach of blending learning with face-to-face teaching and learning is as old as computer assistant language learning. The second key point is the emphasis in blending learning is on the need for a principled mix of online and classroom-based activities. The third one is pedagogy features highly in the abounding definitions of blended learning. A closer look at the foundation upon which technology is incorporated into the learning environment is the distinguishing feature of blended learning, as evidenced by this. So next is blending learning has already been implemented by different schools nationwide, be it in a private or public schools. The third is combining of pedagogical approaches and methodologies to produce an optimum learning outcome. Blended learning theoretical roots are seen as being social constructivism and cognitivism. The guiding principles of social constructivism: knowledge is constructed through human activity, individuals create meaning through their interactions. Social constructivist principles inform the collaborative elements in blended learning. Constructivism based blended learning changes the paradigm of information transfer from teaching to learning, and also placing learners in charge of finding, creating, applying, and verifying the knowledge they have learned through social cooperation with their peers and teachers. This cognitivism. Cognitivism is a theory that focuses on how the mind receives, processes, organizes, stores, and retrieves information. Cognitivism also it relates to the cognitive learning theory, which was developed and first published by John Piaget. So, in relating to activities such as the use of epistemological online tools, the principle of cognitive learning can help students understand new material or task better. And so, students learn by doing while using cognitive learning. With this practical method, students may grasp new materials more thoroughly and in more depth. Motiram and Sharma describe the language teachers as being armed with a sophisticated toolkit. So this means that their knowledge of the different tools consisting of Web 2.0 technologies, their understanding of methodology, and the needs and desires of their learners became teachers as sophisticated. Digital learning, learners come to the blended learning context with formidable skill sets and digital literacies, which facilitate the achievement of the said principles. And also, the fitness of our learners to engage with it is proof that blended learning is a logical and natural evolution of our learning agenda. And that's why learners are called digital natives because learners possesses strong skill sets and digital literacy when they enter the blended learning environment, which helps them attain the aforementioned goals. And also, blended learning is a logical and natural evolution of our learning agenda because, as demonstrated by the readiness of our students to participate in it. And blended learning tends to be seen as a model conceived and implemented at curriculum level. And also, blended learning tends to embrace for distance learning programs, and blending learning tends to be seen as the approach influencing the flipped classroom. Next, we have the flipped classroom concept. So, the flipped or inverted teaching structure, it presents the following. First is instructional content delivered outside the class. The second is engagement with the content, skill development, and practice done in class. So, flipped class is one in which the normal sequence of learning content and applying it is reversed. So, allowing students to acquire the necessary knowledge prior to class. And also, during the class, teachers assist students in clarifying and applying that knowledge in an active and interactive way. This the framework for blended language learning. So in blended learning, it also referred to a technology mediated instruction, so such as web enhanced instruction or mixed mode instruction. It is a teaching methodology that integrates visual learning resources and online interaction with the traditional classroom techniques. And now we have the framework for blended language learning. As you can see, this scheme conceives of face-to-face and technology as modes, each with corresponding sub-modes. Those for face-to-face teaching, for examples, range from traditional teacher-learner, transition mode to learner. And also, the technology mode can involve learners working online or offline. In addition, using this perspective, text range along the continuum from static through to dynamic, and a printed handout is considered static. For static, for face-to-face, printed handout or image and web page. For the technology in dynamic, students can use mobile texting, chat, or online chat. The key point here is this brings us to the learner material dimension, which appears on the schema as a two-way symbiotic relationship. So the symbiosis corresponds to a reader response concept, which means the meaning of the text is not fixed and immutable, but is interpreted by the reader or viewer. Next is materials at the dynamic end of the spectrum in particular are learner produced and learner influenced. Next is the core dimension that gives coherence to the blended learning task, and by extension is the model of integration. So model of integration is the key to the success of the truly blended curriculum. And the model of integration needs to be overt to the learners, complementarity, the interrelationship between the components of blended learning that needs to be transparent. So that is the frameworks for the sequencing and interleaving of the submodes. In blended learning, the provision of scaffolding also has to take account of changing classroom configurations and the shifting relationships that have come about due to technical and pedagogical innovation. So, in addition, as a result of technological and pedagogical innovation, classroom managements and relationships are changing, and this must be considered when providing scaffolding. Moreover, teachers who use blended learning are able to maintain greater organization and meaningful connections with their students. Additionally, blended learning is adaptable as can be incorporated into practically any kind of classroom. So we have here the blended learning tools. So we have telephones, online multimedia software, online web, and mobile phones. So the technologies involved in blended learning are not limited to communication tools. Next, we have the presentation tools. We have the PowerPoint, the Prezi, and the Wordle. These tools are being used for learning plans. When we say Wordle, that is a word cloud generator tool, while Prezi and PowerPoint, Prezi is overtaking the PowerPoint as the default presentation tool because it is far more appealing to student-aged users. Blended learning has also benefits. It enhanced engagement and retention, which means interactive and captivating learning is facilitated by blended learning. Interactive text, online discussion boards, and multimedia content are examples of digital resources that can engross the students in the learning process. In addition to that, blended learning gives the students of all skill levels the chance to progress at a speed that suits them. It lets quick learners go further while allowing slower learners to go at their own pace and receive specialized help when they need it.
Language learning case studies. As it has been discussed previously, the blending of learning operates at levels ranging from the task up to the curriculum. The two case studies which follows illustrate how blended language learning can operate in language teaching, in the teaching of English as foreign language, EFL, in the first case, and the second in the learning of Irish. In case study 1, the focus is mainly on the micro level, the task, or what Gruber and Henkelman termed the blended task. In order to reveal the functioning of the mode materials blend as a microcosm of the BLL paradigm itself, a blended task can be situated at any point along the mode continuum, ranging from predominantly face-to-face to learners having online access throughout with little or no teacher mediation. This case study offers two snapshots of contrasting blended tasks carried out with the same group, an advanced EFL class following a semester-long program at the University of Limerick, Ireland in autumn 2012. In a drive for cost effectiveness, module contact hours had been cut from 4 to 3, where the fourth hour becomes a non-face-to-face or also called a self-access. In the first task, it is shown how a consciousness-raising task was given a blended learning framework. The core course book for the program, the Certificate in Advanced English, or CAE book, Objective Advanced by Odell and Broadhead, was the starting point, and it was presented with the following verb patterns. Do you wish? Meet me earlier. I wish I have more time. I wish inform you of our decision. Now it became clear that the learners needed to clarify patterns and match these two functions and meanings. As a first step, the teacher generated a concordance for the search string I wish from an online corpus. This exposition of this first task demonstrates, first, how the concept of blended learning gives a coherent framework to tasks that are multimodal. It also illustrates the inherent flexibility of the blended learning paradigm and how blended learning is intrinsically learner-led. Where learners are given more autonomy, they will revert to their learning comfort zone, be this working online, on screen, or with traditional print-based materials. To summarize, the progress and process of the blend in this series of tasks is extrapolated from the framework for blended language learning. Moving on to the second case study, the teaching of Irish. So this case study uses blended learning framework to implement a problem-based learning methodology, thus illustrating what could be seen as a synergy between the two, deriving from their shared socio-constructivist principles, conceiving learning as a process of constructing knowledge in social environments, and hence learning collaborative construction of knowledge. What then is the future of blended learning? Blended learning is likely to remain an important concept in language teaching since its overall focus is concerned with the search for best practice. For instance, the attempt to identify the optimum mix of course delivery in order to provide the most effective language learning experience, suggests Sharma. Whatever its future, blended learning is doubtless not the last permutation we shall see in language teaching of the ever-changing technology-language learner relationship.